So I pulled one card before we began, before I turned the camera on, and I pulled the star card right side up. Isn't this a beautiful card? I love this deck. It's the Woodland Warden Tarot deck, and I love the images. This is the star card. See if I can get it to focus. Focus. Anyway, it's Aquarian energy, which is interesting because it is Aquarius season and there's a lot of Aquarius energy in the sky right now. But sometimes it's interesting to look at the tarot correspondence too, because in the tarot deck, the star card is connected to Aquarius, but it's also a card of healing. We don't always associate the theme or the energy of healing with Aquarius. So I find that really interesting and it adds another dimension to Aquarian energy. There's an energy of faith here, faith as a requirement, even on the spiritual path. It's this energy of the belief comes first, right? So many of us have been taught, like, I have to see it to believe it, that kind of frequency, right? It's a kind of mode of operating or a way of perceiving where we have to, we feel we need proof before we can believe in something. And yet, when it comes to spirituality, we have to be willing to make that leap of faith, even if it's in an experimental way, even if it's in a sort of scientific way, right? Which is also very connected to Aquarius. Aquarius governs science and experimentation. And so, even if we're doing it in an exploratory, experimental way, there is a requirement to first be willing to believe, even if we hold that belief provisionally, right? Even if we say, I'm going to experimentally try on this belief and then see what happens, right? And I can always adjust my beliefs in retrospect after I receive the results of this experiment, right? This sort of metaphysical experiment of playing with beliefs and then seeing what happens. Because, of course, what we believe greatly impacts our experience of the world, right? So, this is an energy of being willing to believe in magic, in guidance, in God, even, or whatever word you want to use for all that is, for source, for the great mystery, right? To believe in magic is actually required in order to experience magic. And the card on the bottom of the deck is the Two of Pentacles. I can't get it. I can't get the camera to focus. There we go. So this is a card of balance, of weighing different options or different priorities or different energies. And in this context, I'm getting that this one way of, thinking of this or relating to this is as balancing the feminine and the masculine within. So structure is required, discipline is required on the spiritual path, right? Intention is required, even an element of will, like the will to practice every day, to show up for, for spiritual life. So that's kind of a more masculine energy of the structure, right? Having a daily practice, for instance, having an intention, and yet those masculine aspects can then hold a more feminine frequency of reception, right? And particularly if we're building a relationship with our guide team or with spirit or with God or our ancestors, right? Or any beings on the other side, right? Or even with source itself, let's say, that requires the ability to sit back and receive. And for many of us, that's not easy. And I mean, that certainly feels kind of on the cutting edge for me, even though I've been working with astrology for more than a decade. For me, I'm still learning that balance of the masculine and the feminine. I'm still learning how to set my ego aside and listen and just receive. So let's try that together. Let's simply, for a moment, see if we can listen and maybe ask spirit, right? Even if you've never done a practice of connecting with your guides before, you can start right now. Just simply ask spirit. You don't need to know particular guides. You can just address like your guide team, just trusting that they're there, right? It's that leap of faith again, just being willing to experiment with it and simply ask your guides, do you have any guidance for me? Or what do I need to see? Or maybe you have a specific question. And you may not hear a direct answer right away, but again, that leap of faith, can you trust an answer to come in its own time, in its own way, right? It might come through someone else, right? It might come through a video you watched later on, or a conversation you overhear, or a book you read, or an insight you receive, or a journaling practice. So let it come in its own time, in its own way. But the first step is that willingness to ask, and then the willingness to receive. Okay, so let's see if any other cards want to come out. There's something about tools here, tools of practice, right? And like some days I hear a very direct channel, and some days I don't. And there's also an aspect of faith, even in that, of trusting that that's all just part of the process, and that we have these different tools, for example, tarot or astrology or like muscle testing, or there's so many different tools, automatic writing. There's many different tools for conversing with source, right? For developing our connection to our guide team, for receiving guidance. And it can be beautiful to connect with readers, right? Um, to get a reading, right? To get our information from source in that way. But it's so empowering when we learn to develop a direct connection to source as well. And those things certainly don't have to be mutually exclusive. And getting readings can sometimes be a very helpful way for us to strengthen our connection to source, right? So they're not opposed, but if we only always outsource wisdom or spiritual knowledge, then we're like missing out on an opportunity to empower ourselves, right? So it begins with intention, it begins with desire and frequency. There's something about frequency coming through. I'm hearing like a willingness to rise above. It's okay. So the message that's coming through is a part of receiving guidance And it's so funny that this is the direction that this channel is taking. I had no idea where this was going to go before we began. And for me, that's scary, right? I like to have a plan, I like to know, but I'm learning how to just trust as well in my own way, right? We're all still growing and developing wherever we are on the path, right? Um, but it's interesting that this is turning into a message around developing our own practice, right? And mm, so what's coming through right now is that part of that ability to receive guidance, right? As we're developing a relationship with source, with guides, with ancestors, whatever it is learning to tune our frequency as if it were like a radio station, right? So it's like there's so like, okay, energy itself transcends space time, right? And so we actually all have the ability to tune into literally any different energy or frequency. So, for example, if you want to know what it's like to be a butterfly, right? You can develop the ability to tune in to the frequency and experience of that being. It's a funny example to come through, but the idea is that we can tap into the frequency of anything. And a part of this skill of relating with our guides is tuning our own radio to the frequency which our guides are on, right? To the frequency of our guides. And they're saying, like, you have to be willing to tune to above the noise because there's so much noise in, the energetic currents that it's very easy to lose. Excuse me. It's very easy to lose the signal amid all that noise. Okay, so how can the listeners do that? Like, what source is a practical way to actually do that? What do you mean? How do we tune the frequency? There's something really important about being willing to receive, right? Being willing to sort of enter the mystery, enter the darkness, the unknowing, the willingness to not know, right? Just like I turned the camera on and I didn't know where this was going to go. And that's a little scary, right? It's nice to have a script. But it's like sort of getting over that fear, which is usually like just momentary. And then once we do it, it's like, okay, it's okay. It's safe to be in the unknown. It's safe to receive. And so many of us have been in survival mode for so long. And some of that is ancestral. Some of that is like almost like the frequency that humanity has been set at. Many of us have also learned survival from like culture and cultural institutions and educational structures and so on, because that frequency of survival is very embedded in humanity. And yet we can't actually receive, we can't fully receive when we're in that frequency because receiving, including receiving guidance, requires the ability to relax and open. And it's an energy of ease, and yet for many of us it's not necessarily easy. um, but only because we've been trained out of it, or we aren't necessarily practiced in it, right? Many of us aren't necessarily practiced in receiving. So even something as simple as receiving a compliment, like notice what happens in your body, in your system when someone compliments you. And for many of us, there's a tendency to actually like clench up physically, even to not allow the compliment in, to not truly receive it. And they're kind of saying, like, if you can't receive a compliment, you're not going to be able to receive guidance from source. Interesting. So it's like that's a beautiful place to begin a practice, right? Practice receiving compliments, practice receiving gifts, right? Practice receiving love, even. Source loves you, they're saying, but many of us aren't allowing in the love from source. Many of us have learned to protect ourselves, to guard ourselves physically, even energetically, right? It can be like postural, it can be embodied, this sort of guarding and protection. So there's this energy coming in of like all the many different modalities and practices weaving together to assist us in this work. So yoga, for instance, or breath work, or even like getting a massage, these different practices that help us to open up in the body can help us also to learn how to receive guidance and messages and wisdom. And wisdom itself comes from that place. Wisdom itself comes as direct from source without an intermediary. So we can access the frequency of wisdom by reading a text, for example, that was written in that mode where someone was receiving information direct from source. But even then, if we simply take for granted the words, right? And are still in that mode of like outsourcing, then even wisdom can be received in a way that isn't wisdom. Let's see if I can say that more clearly. It's like for wisdom writing, let's say, to be received as wisdom requires us to allow those words, excuse me, to open up our own direct connection to source. So it's almost like, can we let it just be a trigger for us to access our own direct knowing? We all have this ability to connect directly to source. And that's what's required even on the spiritual path, is learning that ability. And all the many different techniques, modalities, practices in a way can work together to help us to open up those channels, right? To receive our own direct knowing, to receive wisdom for ourselves. Okay, so I started shuffling and then all that came through. So let's see. Oh yeah, it was funny. I started shuffling and then I was like, tools, right? Tools of practice, tarot being one of them. Page of Wands. Interesting. So cute. I just love these cards. They're so cute. A little lemur, maybe, or um, not quite sure. Lemming? Anyway, very cute. It's a very loud siren. I'm just going to pause for a moment. So this card is coming through with a message of encouragement on this path of commitment to our own practice. And they're saying practice is required, it's necessary. Um, it may not always feel fun, although it certainly can be. But some form of dedication or commitment is actually a requirement on the spiritual path. And in terms of if we want to develop psychically or intuitively, practice is required. It's the first step. It may feel sometimes boring or disconnected from the desired outcome. It's like, um, doing a meditation practice may seem to have nothing to do with developing psychically, but actually it has everything to do with it. And it's one example of tuning that radio frequency, right? So meditation is one way in which we can do that. So it's like all the groundwork of practice in your own way, like intuitively feeling out which practices are appropriate for you, what is a doable stretch for you, how much a day, and like being willing to play with that. And yet, some form of practice is necessary daily. The guides are saying every single day, even if it's 5 minutes. That's a beautiful place to begin. But beginning is required, taking that step. And wherever you are, this message is still for you. So some of you have been practicing for decades. And so it's like, what is the next doable stretch for you? Right. So for me, I'm trying to show up and do one of these messages every single day for 40 days, which is very out of my comfort zone. I'm very comfortable with meditating every day. So that's not my doable stretch. That's not a stretch at all, right? For me to meditate, but for me to record myself every day, for me to, I'm putting in the words of like trying to channel, but the guides are like, no, channel, just say you're doing it. Say you're channeling every day, because it's channeling for me is not in my comfort zone. I can more comfortably work with astrology, or I can it's easier for me to channel when I'm writing, because I can allow it to come when it comes. Whereas showing up and being like, here I am, I'm going to channel, that's a stretch for me. But it's important to stretch ourselves wherever we are on the path. So if you're brand new to spirituality, then maybe 5 minutes a day is your doable stretch, and 5 minutes a day of anything, right? Meditation is a good place to begin. Or it could be as simple as a gratitude practice in the morning, right? Consider 3 things you feel grateful for. You could do it before you even get out of bed in the morning, right? 3 things you feel grateful for, and then drop into the feeling tone of gratitude itself. If you've been practicing for many years, maybe your doable stretch is maybe you're learning tarot. Maybe you could adopt a practice of pulling a tarot card every day at the beginning of the day. And at the end of the day, contemplate what are the connections between the card you pulled and the day you experienced, right? And that's a beautiful way to learn tarot one card at a time. There's someone at the door, just a moment. Okay, where were we? Yeah, what is your doable stretch? That's the key, right? But stretching is required. Okay. I think that's enough for today. Spirit, does anything else want to come through? So there is this sort of a final message around Spirit's appreciation for us on this path and for our willingness to do this work. They're saying it's not just personal. It's not about just your own experience of life. Although, as you practice, almost always life will feel easier and improve. But it's not just about that. It's not just about the personal, it's about all, right? And as we develop spiritually, we actually assist the all. We literally assist the entire cosmos in balancing, coming back to the Two of Pentacles. So another aspect of this is it's like harmony and balance, divine balance. So they're just offering us appreciation for the work we're doing, for our intentions, for our willingness to show up, for our willingness to put in some amount of effort. um yeah, to keep showing up day after day. And we don't need it to be perfect. It's not about perfection at all. It's about showing up, is what they're saying. Okay, so that's the message for today. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Sending you my love, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.